Big and powerful entities rarely care to consider how they might be destructive towards smaller or even different ecosystems. Look at the utter disregard of those who claim to be from the heritage and the inheritors of Sulaiman. Sulaiman thus demonstrates his gratitude. How? He demonstrates his gratitude for his God-given knowledge of languages through an act of mercy. Your personal transformation or deterioration is directly related to the health or the death of your own civilization. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نستعينه نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. With knowledge comes aspiration and power. With power comes the propensity for a lack of gratitude. With a lack of gratitude comes self-centrism. With self-centrism comes amorality. And with amorality comes destruction. This is not new news. It's nearly a year old, 10 months to a year old. But there was a report that was written by Yuval Abraham, an investigative report, published in the Plus 972 magazine, called Lavender, the AI machine directing Israel's bombing spree in Gaza. In it, he talks about the incorporation of the Israeli military, or the Israeli military's incorporation of AI systems in their warfare, their genocidal war, carried out against the people of Palestine, and indeed the people of Lebanon. And he writes about AI technologies, American-produced AI technologies, using Google Images and Microsoft and OpenAI, which once upon a time used to be a non-profit organization who part of their bylaws said that none of their technology is meant to harm anyone. They later rescinded that and said that their standards then just opened themselves up to some murky legalese language that allowed essentially for Israel to carry out the bombing campaign that they did. But he writes that AI technologies like Lavender, one program, or Where is Daddy is the name of another technology, are designed to be game changers for the slow processes of warfare. These AI technologies produce targets at a much faster rate, the idea being that fast, streamlined warfare will overwhelm the enemy and thus be more effective than a more drawn-out operation for the sake of careful discernment. Where is Daddy? You might wonder, what does that title refer to? Where is Daddy in particular is designed to track targets to their family residence and then bomb them there. It's not designed to track the targets when they leave their family home and then bomb them carefully so as to avoid the collateral damage of the family of the target. And we could say a lot about how these targets are selected, mind you, in a very general way, not with discernment and specific intelligence. No, the point is to kill the operative or the target, if they are indeed Hamas or not, or even remotely affiliated with Hamas, and their family, and the buildings. 70%, it's estimated, of the buildings in Gaza have been demolished. Low-level targets are allotted a kill ratio of 20 civilians. Low-level targets. That could be anybody. Battalion or brigade commanders, those types of targets, were caused to kill over 100 civilians per target as per the parameters of the program, which we watched happen in Shuja'iyya and some of the other areas numerous times. Or even when they went to try to rescue they used the port that they put there for humanitarian purposes and then got into the aid trucks and then shot up an entire civilian populated area and killed hundreds and injured over 1,000 in order to extract the 2-3 prisoners of war that they had intelligence about. But psychologically, there's a very major point here to consider. The reason we know about any of this information is because Israeli operators of these technologies told this reporter this information. One said that in a bombing of a commander, they, quote, knew that it would kill over 100 civilians. They knew that it would kill over 100. And then he says, the operative himself, for me, psychologically, it was unusual. Over 100 civilians crosses some red line. Yuval Abraham correctly reports that at the beginning of this genocide, it was made immediately clear that the international law of proportionality had been rendered totally meaningless. In order to do so, Israel overwhelmed their own military officers. How? By giving them thousands of pending targets developed all by AI technology. All that was left was to push the button. You know that overwhelming feeling you have when you've let your emails get away from you? Trash, 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 trash. So what do you think they did when all was left was to push the button? They pushed it. The AI gave them the license to tell themselves that international law and basic morality had been calculated and vetted by a computer. No point in arguing. If you carefully comb through each target selection, then you are bottlenecking. And that is a waste of American taxpayer money. Remember? This was the whole reason. I didn't bring the book because I just ordered it, but there is an Israeli commander or general or whatever that goes around talking about how AI is the future and we need to invest in AI. Why? Because AI is what gets rid of the bottleneck of warfare. At the beginning we said, the bottleneck of warfare is discerning targets to minimize casualties and adhere to international law, at least by appearance. But AI gets rid of this bottleneck because you just plug in the parameters of, international law. But the parameters are 20 civilians for a low-level target. That could be somebody who rides a bike. I don't know, that it transfers information. Allegedly, we don't even know for certain whether that person is in fact doing something materially substantial for Hamas or not. Doesn't matter. AI gave them the license to tell themselves that international law and basic morality had been calculated and vetted by the computer. No point in arguing. If you carefully comb through each target selection, then you are the bottleneck. You will be blamed for the bottleneck when you've been given this magic technology that can win you the war without even thinking. Palestinians and Lebanese became as if mere ants under the magnifying glass of a deranged child. This semester, I have the unique opportunity of auditing the Sheikh's class on international human rights. Pray for him. What a time to teach a course like that. And the feeling of these students is palpable in this class. And I have to say, the students are remarkably impressive. They're very smart. And they do their homework. And finally, one of the students during class had a moment in which he had some sort of an emotional release, kind of like a moral emotional release. And he brought to mind what many in the class were thinking. And what he said was very along the lines of, this is so hard for me to understand how international law and being an international lawyer, how do I take this seriously? Maybe, and then he tried to qualify it because he understood what he was saying and that it was hard to swallow. He said, maybe it does certain things, I don't know. I learned a lot in this class and I'm deeply appreciative, and it's been very enlightening and important for me personally. But I think what I've learned is this type of lawyering isn't for me. Now, you as a teacher, how do you respond to this? As someone who has spent an entire lifetime dedicated to this facet of law, in order to set things right, I learned a great deal in that exchange. This is a patient teacher. A moral teacher. Maybe I'll read from this book instead, to make it easier to convey what it is that I wish for you to know. This push and pull is not dating only back as far as 2020 or 2010. This goes back to the very inception of international law and the laws of war. The 1800s, the late 1800s, the early 1900s. People like H.G. Wells insisted in 1919, this is a book from a book called Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War by Samuel Moyn. It says that H.G. Wells says in 4 brief years, in 1919, Europe was compelled to develop a warfare monstrously out of proportion to any conceivably good which the completest victory would possibly achieve for the other side. If that was so, quote, all Geneva Conventions and such palliative ordinances, though excellent in intention, and good in their immediate effects, make ultimately for the persistence of war as an institution. This is interesting. The persistence of war as an institution. I think that is the root of the emotion that is frustrating the students in this class. Another commentator was brutal about how and where the demand to end brutality had led. Quote, "The failure of international law is due to the failure of the statesmen and jurists of the last century to use the moral forces of their day for the development of international law along the lines of true progress. And this is in turn due to their preoccupation with the laws of war. If international law was to be relevant again, it would have to be a law of peace." Quincy Wright, another international law commentator here, says, he didn't go as far as to blame humane war for endless war, but it was clear to him that if international law did not institutionalize peace, it was not worth much. He says that the war has shown that international law cannot greatly reduce the destructiveness of war in 1920. This is how he feels. If so, the effort of international law to regulate war was of slight practical value, and international law must more seriously devote itself to the regulation of the conditions which led to war and the elimination of war itself. Indeed, these are some cogent and brilliant arguments as old as 1920. The book goes on to explain about a significant amount of historical evidence that shows that at the onset of the Geneva Convention and the laws of war and implementations, that it seemed to have little to no effect on Arab or Muslim or African populations, and that there would be wars, in, for example, the English versus the Sudanese, that would wipe out tens of thousands in a single night of battalions, individual military soldiers, and England would virtually lose none. It was a grotesque lack of proportionality. But then how do you answer this question to the student as the teacher? You see, this is the crux of the answer that the teacher gave. And I am adding my own interpretation. International law may not currently be the direct vehicle to end and abolish war. But what does it do? It gives the moral warrant for the need of a cultural paradigm shift away from war as a necessary human institution. As we, human beings, develop morally and develop insaniya, humanness, moral humanness, developed moral humanness, we will naturally traverse the path towards moral civilizational balance and equity. And given the fact that we are a day away from the holy month of Ramadan, this is, in fact, the spirit of the holy month of Ramadan. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستجب لكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحان رب العزة عما يصفون. والسلام على المرسلين. والحمد لله رب العالمين. This is the month of the Quran. And I want to connect the first sermon to the second sermon with the three-part narrative of Sulaiman alayhi salam in Surah An-Naml, verses 20 through 44, and to think about this narrative from a different direction than we usually do. Of course, the commentary of Project Illumine is essential. Sharif's khutbah about Sulaiman and the esteemed ant is essential. My dear friend and colleague Bitska Marison's Substack entry about the Hoopoe witnessing toxicity from her Gift from the Heaven Substack is also incredibly enlightening and I took a deep amount of inspiration from some of her observations. So let's consider this three-part narrative that everybody knows very well in Surah An-Naml. The beginning, Sulaiman and Dawood were given knowledge by God. Significant knowledge they are given by God. And what do they do with this knowledge? They consistently declare their gratitude. Some of this knowledge is ilm ladunni, some of this knowledge is direct from God, and some of it comes from his advisors and his officers. Sulaiman does what? Sulaiman regulates his internal knowledge and his external knowledge through the action of shukr, through gratitude. Sulaiman regulates his internal and external ilm through shukr. Connect this to your entrance into this month of Ramadan. First narrative, part 1. As Sulaiman's legions pass through the valley of the ants, he hears an ant imploring its colony to take cover to avoid the destruction of the ant's colony, the civilization. The ant speaks from very sound experience. Big and powerful entities rarely care to consider how they might be destructive towards smaller or even different ecosystems. Sulaiman thus demonstrates his gratitude. How? He demonstrates his gratitude for his God-given knowledge of languages through an act of mercy. This is his shukr. And he again brings to mention, he thanks God for his ability to understand the ant, and his action of shukr is through mercy. His mercifulness is what proves his gratitude. He brings it to mention and he acts. How does he do this? He halts an entire powerful military to allow the ants time to enter their homes safely. My God, how to juxtapose those who are coming to this land of Palestine, supposedly the descendants of Sulaiman, supposedly those who wish to excavate the old dominion and kingdom of Sulaiman, to realize Sulaiman's former glory. And in the process, how do they honor Sulaiman's legacy? The man who halted an entire army to not result even in the death of the smallest creature and destroy their civilization. The respect for civilization. Look at the utter disregard of those who claim to be from the heritage and the inheritors of Sulaiman. Not only do they not allow the women and the children and the boys and the innocent men and whoever to enter their homes in peace to avoid the ugliness of war, they instead lure people into their own homes to kill them, to exterminate them. In another article, there was a story of a Lebanese family who, in the bombing campaign in South Lebanon, thought that it would be smart to ask their children to play in the front yard so that the drones and the AI imaging would realize that we're not a target and that we have children with us. They didn't see themselves as a target, but all they saw was random strikes. And they thought, oh, if they but had a little bit more information, they wouldn't make this choice. Did that stay the Israeli hand? They murdered them in cold blood. That's the inheritance of Sulaiman? Part 2, narrative number 2. Sulaiman takes account of his legion of birds and looks for an intelligence officer by the name of Hudhud, the hoopoe bird. Customarily, the hoopoe was tasked with finding water and leading the way to the water source. Incidentally, this is very interesting, given that the word Sharia means the path to the water source. But in this case, this is not where the hoopoe had gone. And Sulaiman wonders where he is. He notices that he's not present without authorization, so he says that the hoopoe must return with a divine warrant. He says he must return with a sultan mubin, a clear divine warrant to explain his absence, or else face severe punishment or even execution. You've been over the story many times. Can you explain this harsh ultimatum from Sulaiman? This seemingly harsh ultimatum? Is this ultimatum, this threat, because Sulaiman is a tyrant king? If you don't do as he says, he kills you. Let's think about that. The hoopoe does return, and he says something remarkable to Sulaiman. What does he say? He says, I have come to know something you do not. What a claim. Sulaiman, the one who has been given direct knowledge from Allah that is incomparable to knowledge previous, knows something that Sulaiman doesn't? Fascinating. Quite a claim. In fact, it almost borders on gloating. The hoopoe then informs Sulaiman of the glorious throne of Bilqis, the Queen of Sheba, a sun-worshipping civilization, and this kingdom or queendom that she has. Sulaiman's response is telling. He says, we shall see if you have spoken the truth. What does that mean when Sulaiman says that? As the head of a government, Sulaiman does not simply act on what his advisors tell him without verification. Why such interrogation? It is the procedural justice that he has learned and inherited from his father Dawood in Surah Sad. Go to Surah Sad and learn about it. Procedural justice. Failure in procedure can lead to devastating consequences. It is a meticulous commitment to corroboration of intelligence and facts. Furthermore, with great knowledge comes great aspiration and power. Power must be regulated by gratitude and accountable to the mandate of the Basmala, of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. The Islamic tradition has interpreted the hoopoe story allegorically. Tawran ba'da tawr. Time after time. It has been allegorically looked at. Thus, it would do well to understand the hoopoe as the aspiration, this is the allegory, understand the hoopoe as the aspiration for recognition and power that comes with intellect, intelligence, might, and social status. If these inclinations are left to fly without regulation or interrogation, it will not be long before the hoopoe will have traded your grateful stewardship of the kingdom of moral submission for a temporal kingdom in service of brute force and materialism. I remind you to see Vitska's Substack, and to her Substack is called Gifts from the Heavens. And at this juncture, I also would like to refer you, please, to read Dr. Farah al-Sharif's sermons at the court on Substack. Incredible entries, and I take a lot of inspiration from her writing. Now I ask you again, is Sulaiman threatening his hoopoe as an act of tyranny? or an act of precise internal and external accountability to the moral balance. Narrative number 3. What happens next? Sulaiman sends the Hoopoe with a letter demanding the kingdom based on materialism to come under the dominion of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Compared to other monarchs or powerful people in the Quran, Queen Bilqis makes several choices that we might consider balanced or even morally mature. First, she refuses to make a judgment without first consulting her most trusted advisors. The advisors, of course, give her bad advice. But it is interesting that they qualify that ultimately it's her decision as the queen. And this represents a relatively organized system of governance. But when her advisors emphasize their military might as a solution to responding to Sulaiman, Queen Bilqis again responds with a wisdom. What does she say? When kings enter a foreign land, they destroy it and take the people from a state of honor to a state of humiliation. This is the essence of kings as she has come to learn it and know it. So how does she respond? She opts for diplomacy. She sends a gift, deciding to make a state visit to Sulaiman instead. This is the action of a wise politician who opts for diplomacy and mutual regard and cooperation over recklessness despite her military power. International law. Jus cogens. That's what that is. But there's a curveball. Something happens that Queen Bilqis could never account for. Do you know what it is? علم من الكتاب. علم من الكتاب. Some knowledge of the revelation. Who had this some knowledge of the revelation? A mere courtier, someone within Sulaiman's court. This is a key point. Sulaiman says, this arsh, who can bring it to me? Who can bring me the symbol of the might and glory of the queendom of Sheba? A jinn says, I'll bring it to you through my jinn magic before you can stand. Then a man says, I'll bring it to you before you blink. How did he do that? I don't know. علم من الكتاب. If you cannot explain this key point of the three-part narrative of Sulaiman, the ant and the hoopoe and the Queen of Sheba, it means that you were unable to understand the entire narrative of this narrative and the narrative of Sulaiman and the entire surah. Think about it. Did Sulaiman's power and might come from pursuing nation-state style material dominance? Is the Solomonic model to build military and material power to subdue competitors and ensure hegemony? I contend that the answer is definitely not. No, Sulaiman's power is an insistence on meticulously upholding the divine moral code, the Sharia. That is evidenced by his letter to Bilqis when he says that all civilizations must act in submission to the thorough morality in recognition of God's moral dominion over all existence. No act is to be undertaken, but that it is diligently and scrupulously interrogated to be an act in adherence with the spirit of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Vitska very correctly observes that Bilqis' erroneously attribution of the source of life as the sun and worshipping the sun and in essence, materiality. She goes on to say, Vitska says, that Sulaiman showed her the ways in which she had been deluded by material realities and failed to see the truth that they simultaneously veil and reveal. How did he do that? When she came on the state visit, Sulaiman showed her her throne and said, recognize this? This is your throne. And she says, it's as if it were. Looks just like it. كأنه هو. It's almost, must be it. And then she is led to where she thinks is water within the palace. It's another amazing allegory here. The Hoopoe is leading Sulaiman's army to the water, the Sharia. Sulaiman is leading Bilqis, the Queen of Sheba, to what she thinks is the Sharia. She's coming to water. But it's a delusion and an illusion. It's not water. It's something that tricked even her senses. It's this fantastic glass that looked just like crystal blue water to her. In that moment, what happens? She submits. She submits. And the symbolism is very notable. Bilqis thought she was being led to water, a sharia to the mulk. The mundane and the material is mulk. Rather, through this example, Sulaiman led her to the transcendent sharia of the malakut. And there she submitted. What convinced her to submit? What did she realize? Sulaiman's mighty civilization was built on an assiduous commitment to moral development. Ilmul Kitab. Ilmul Kitab had the power to do UFO level technology of being in two places at simultaneously, near simultaneous time. I don't know how that works, but Sulaiman is telling you to submit to that moral dominion and allow for Allah to dispense that knowledge and mercy upon you. God may well reward that civilization with the might of the mulk and the malakut. That guy within the court nicked Bilqis' symbol of power right from underneath her nose. Ilm dedicated to serving God can do seemingly miraculous things. It makes the mulk philosophy look utterly silly. The Queen of Sheba's submission tells us something incredibly important. A moral foundation and a propensity towards beauty and equity is a propensity towards submission to the truth of Sharia and Islam. Wherever Muslims are in the world, this is what I learned in the international human rights class. All the technical points removed. This is what I learned. Wherever Muslims are in the world, we need to develop ourselves spiritually and morally to simultaneously encourage a Sheban civilization with the propensity to level up and develop morally, and to develop a Solomonic civilization, one that will be prepared to accept the Sheban civilization into a joint collaborative submission to the moral philosophy of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wa Sharia. Ought I to relate this to our current intelligence, to our power that we have developed in our AI technologies, the power of the might of our civilization in the West, and our potential to flourish through the jurists who have thanklessly worked on combining morality with jurisprudence as a way to take us out of darkness to light? Or should we highlight our potential to destroy through the nation-state philosophy, grow bigger and stronger, so that when you're an advisor and they ask you, what are we to do with this competing civilization? Destroy it. Flex your muscle over it. Bring it to the White House and tell it, your closest ally, England, you think you can handle Russia by yourself? Yes. The ant fears that Sulaiman may destroy his civilization without even noticing, because Sulaiman is so mighty and big, he squashes civilizations. Just as Bilqis says that kings enter cities and lay them to waste. This goes hand in hand with the Hoopoe's search for water or for kingdom. Are you aspiring for a kingdom for the sake of your own glory? Or are you aspiring to bring the world under the order of balance and mizan? The power of diplomacy over sheer brute force of war. Open the dialogue for mutual admiration and eventually submission to a truth and a better way of geopolitical interaction. How do we relate this now to you, the individual, in this holy month of Ramadan? Your personal transformation or deterioration is directly related to the health or the death of your own civilization. Enter the month of Ramadan with this mentality and spend time learning about the surahs that begin with Tasin. Go to Project Lumen and listen carefully. And what you will find is that the mystery of Tasin or Tasin Mim will reveal itself to you. You will come to the conclusion that Ta is Tawr, Tatawwur, development, time, generations. That Sin is Insan, Uns, humanness, Insaniya, friendliness. You will learn that Mim is Tamaddun, civilization, and that Mim is Mizan, a civilization of balance. That's why Musa says, Anastu naran. Anastu naran. What an interesting way to say, I have found the light. I have found a fire, a light. Nowhere else in the Quran is that verb used in this way, to see. Could have said it in tons of different ways. Anastu naran. And where did he go for this development? Tawr Sinin. Think about it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Ya Rab, I ask you to help us in this holy month of Ramadan to develop ourselves such that we develop our civilization so that we become a civilizational moral model of balance and beauty, so that we may, in every place in the world that we are Muslims, be the representatives and the deputies of morality and kindness and the types of civilizations that may lead to the abolishment of war. Tawran ba'da tawr. Time after time, over time, we will become generations together that have developed to a Solomonic civilization. Ya Rab, help us in this quest. Wa salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Wa aqim as-salat.